What is the most fun part about a real estate transaction? Reading your contract of sale, right? Everybody loves to read legalese and scratched out contracts that are kind of hard to follow, right? Okay. If you're not me, or if you're not a lawyer, that is probably not your answer to the question, what's your favorite part of a real estate transaction? But it doesn't need to be. I think that you just need to focus on a few provisions in the contract that are going to be really important and that you, along with your agent, should be negotiating up front and focused on. All right, I'm Mike. This is Mondays with Mike. We're in late July now. I'm not even going to get into the market dynamics. I want to just talk about a few provisions in the contract that have come up recently, and they come up all the time. The first one that comes up all the time, but especially now, is the mortgage contingency clause, and in particular, how appraisals are dealt with. The standard contract in New York does not state that if it underappraises the property, you can renegotiate or get out of the deal for either party. If it's an FHA deal, that's a different story, but that has to be specifically provided. Sometimes the contract doesn't allow you to get FHA financing. Really, all it says, if you read the provision, is that the appraisal has to be approved by the lender in order for it to be a valid commitment. All right, so if the borrower still qualifies for the loan amount, they might be at a higher ratio because the sale price is higher than what it appraised for, but if they still qualify, they don't necessarily have the right or ability to negotiate for a reduced price. All right, so you have to be really careful with that. The down payment is at risk when it comes to the mortgage contingency clause. The other thing to focus on is what has to be delivered. It's actually the mortgage commitment. And there are some conditions that can be in the commitment, but it's essentially an unconditional commitment to lend that you're trying to present within the time period in the contract. A lot of times we see 45 or 60 days from contract. The borrower and their lender has to provide that commitment. All right, and it's not that if you don't get the commitment within 45 or 60 days, you lose your down payment. No, that's your window to get it, and that's your window to exercise that contingency and get out if you can't get the commitment. And no, you can't just throw it. You can't throw the game, right? You have to, in good faith, be trying to get that commitment, and it's really only if you get a commitment denial letter within that time period that you have your out. So you have to watch the dates. You should know the dates going in, and any agent that's working with you should have that date in there. They should have that window pre-negotiated for you to get your mortgage commitment. Another timing element, closing date. Unless it specifically says in bold, time is of the essence, which it very rarely does in New York, the closing date probably says on or about a certain date. It's usually a loose date. And the convention is, we've talked about this a bunch of times on this series, the convention is within 30 days, either party can push it out. But even if you get 30 days out, it's not that easy to just send a time of the essence letter, as the attorneys like to call it, and have the parties just automatically sit down and close. Nothing is automatic. It's different levels of escalating the threat of what's going to happen if you don't close. Usually the answer is nothing. Everybody just waits as long as the deal is staying on track. If it looks like it's going off the rails, then we might start talking about, is the down payment being lost here? But usually that doesn't happen. Usually it's just a question of the parties being stressed and wanting to maybe keep their interest rate locked in. It's another thing to be really sure you understand. The contract, unless the seller for some reason agrees to it, it does not provide that you as a buyer and borrower can be compensated for having to pay rate lock fees or force the seller to close within your rate lock period. The seller doesn't know what your deal is with the bank, right? That's between you and the bank. So just think about it that way. If you were the seller, you wouldn't want to be responsible for what the buyer was doing with their bank and negotiating with the bank. All right, you lock your rate and you agree to pay those fees to extend a rate lock at your own risk as a buyer. Couple of other things, just as far as the physical premises goes, when you do the inspection, and this goes for agents out there too that I think they lose the forest for the trees sometimes. Remember, the base contract in New York says that systems are going to be delivered in working order. So if there's an electrical issue or a minor plumbing issue, the contract is already going to provide that those things have to be working at walkthrough. So focus on the bigger, more specific items that aren't going to be part of the physical premises, the system at large, that's got to be delivered in working order. That's already going to be taken care of. So yes, you should have that in your list of repairs if you're negotiating as an agent or as a buyer. But remember, that's already kind of built in there. Like it would be very unusual for the seller to say, unless it's a distressed deal or it's an investment property, that you're going to take it as is. Systems don't have to be working. Very uncommon. And then lastly, talking about going back to the property for a walkthrough, how many times you're able to go back to a property as a buyer for measurements, just to sit in the house, to do whatever. It's usually dictated by the contract, and you can't just come back whenever you'd like. Sometimes, and a lot of times, this is a good idea. You negotiate for a predetermined amount of times that a buyer can come back into the house for whatever reason, but usually for measurements or for planning purposes before closing. And you always want to have that last one. You want to make sure if you have a limited number of visits, you save one for the walkthrough within 24 hours of the closing. All right, there are probably a dozen or more other little gotchas that we can go through if people like. If you're watching us on social media, send us a direct message if you have a question on that. You can call us or email us back if you're getting this by email. Always love to hear from you guys. And I'm gonna cut it short before I start rambling, even more than maybe I already have. Hope everybody is having a great summer and staying cool out there. We'll talk to you soon.